Happy Monday! Welcome to ScreenJunkies Universe. It's going to be a great day today. We have so much fun stuff. There's a very good interview with Spencer Gilbert and Dan Murrell with a very fancy man at the end of this show. So you should look forward to that.
Yeah.
That's a nice tease. We're going to talk about Aquaman, villains this year. Dan, we're going to talk about some of the best villains this year. But first, let's talk about that Aquaman in China. I have good news and I have bad news for everybody. Which do you want first? Okay.
The bad news. Sonic looks weird. I saw the poster. He's got shapely buttocks, and I don't like it.
Oh, well, you don't like shapely buttocks?
Not on Sonic.
Okay. Well, we weren't going to talk about Sonic, but I suppose we will before we get to Aquaman opening huge
It's
in
not a
China.
story. We'll talk about it later.
Sonic the
The bad news is there's no charting with Dan today. But
Sorry.
the good news is we are going to talk about Aquaman making a splash in China. Not my headline. That's from THR. They did. It opened very, very big.
Very well.
It's currently tracking ahead of Justice League, ahead of Dawn of Justice, and exceeded in its open the lifetime gross of Wonder Woman in China. So this is ahead of the U.S. release. Dan, thoughts, feelings, emotions, analysis?
Is very good news for Warner Brothers in the sense that it takes a little bit of the pressure off of the release here as far as box office goes, because if we saw this with Venom. Week 2 will I think determine. There's just kind of two different ways that particularly superhero films can do in China. One is that they have a really good opening weekend and then they keep going and they make a lot of money. That's what happened to Venom. It's made like over $250 million there. Or a lot of times a movie will make all of its money in the first weekend and then drop like a rock the second weekend because the release schedule is very aggressive there. So next week's gross, I think, will decide what kind of movie Aquaman is going to be. But this opening is very encouraging, I think, for Warner Brothers. Like I said, number one, it takes some of the pressure off the U.S. box office because you banked at least $100 million in China, which is nice. Number two, it kind of proves, because it's tracking ahead of all of the other films, that at least in China, which is a major market, they do not seem to tie Aquaman directly to the rest of the DCEU, in the sense that more people turned out for this one than have turned out for any other movie in the DCEU, meaning they came to see this movie, not tying it to everything else that came before. And I think that's an encouraging sign, as they seem to be sort of stepping away at least a little bit from a tightly knit cinematic universe.
And it doesn't, I think you can see this from the trailers, it doesn't really tightly tie into the rest of the DCEU, which I think was a smart move on their part. It's a very different film in general. We'll have a review of that later on, or tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Joe Starr, why do you think that this did so particularly well in China? Do you have thoughts?
Yeah, look, there are underwater knights riding sharks that shoot lasers and they throw javelins.
You saw a very different Aquaman than I did, although
That's
not
in the
that
trailer,
different. Right? That's pretty on point. Yeah,
there are people riding seahorses and there's big underwater monsters. There's Spencer. What was it called again? That like the movie they tried to make in China that was going to rival Avatar, and it was super expensive and it spiraled out of control, and then they never made it. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about, but I was going to think of or bring up a different Chinese movie connection.
Well, I was going to think of that because this one feels like, because that one was like a crazy underwater. There were mermaids fighting lobster men and stuff like that, and I feel like this is a redemption song in a way for the Chinese audience that didn't get that movie. I think we may have talked about it in a pre-tape. So right now, I am coming from the future to talk about a movie that I will talk about at some point, maybe this month.
That Spencer mentioned in the past, but you will see in the future.
Yeah. Exactly. Also, he's my mom.
Yeah, that's the twist.
It was weird.
Who's Joe's mom has
Back to the Future thing.
Been the ongoing, I think, like thread in terms of all of the analysis, and that's kind of the linchpin to the ScreenJunkies story. It's Spencer.
There's a Chinese movie that I absolutely love that's by Stephen Chow, and it was called The Mermaid. And this is one of the biggest movies to ever open in China. And open, close, you name it. One of the highest grossing films. And it is very similar to Aquaman in the sense that it ends with like mermaids having like a crazy intergalactic CGI underwater war, and it's about inheriting a mermaid kingdom and stuff like that. It's also super funny, and maybe people think that this is either a sequel or just this kind of movie works in China. Go figure. But I recommend that everyone watch Stephen Chow's The Mermaid if you like your kung fu hustles and your Shaolin soccers.
I love my kung fu hustles.
Well,
and I also
imagine
love
it with
mermaids.
mermaids.
Well, I am right in my head. this is interesting because how this reflects or does not reflect what will happen here in the U.S., I think is a curiosity for a lot of people. I don't think that there is necessarily a direct correlation between how Aquaman does in China and how it will do here. But what are your thoughts, Dan?
Not so much anymore, no. China is its own beast in a lot of sense. Even as I was mentioning with Venom, Venom's done incredibly well here, but it's been even better in China, and that's because they had a very aggressive and very targeted marketing campaign in Venom that was exclusive to China, that catered exclusively to what they thought would work well for that movie in that particular region, and it worked incredibly well. So one of the interesting things about following the Chinese box office is for so long it was sort of that we would export our movies there and that they would do well based on whatever just prestige or people saw the last one. But now the Chinese film industry is really in the last few years come into its own in the sense that you're seeing fewer exports from the United States, but also in the area of marketing and the area of we talked about Tencent, which is a Chinese production company which is now partially bankrolling films in the US and doing the promotion they did it for Venom in China to get big Chinese openings. They're going to do it with Bumblebee. It's really interesting. It's not so much like the tail wagging the dog anymore. It's the fact that the Chinese film industry is its own thing, and now studios are almost doing it completely separately from what they're doing here in the U.S. So to the degree that things in China used to follow what happened in the U.S., I think that's really kind of fallen by the wayside.
I would be curious about the marketing in China. I will say for the marketing in the United States, I think the marketing on Aquaman has been incredibly accurate to what the movie is, which is...
Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, okay, cool. Looks cool.
Yeah. Which is rare. You don't necessarily get that.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to the way that Venom was marketed, which was not necessarily accurate to the movie, but it also kind of was in a weird way.
Here?
No, in China.
In China? Yeah, no.
Yes.
I feel like the way it was marketed in China reflected the movie way more than the marketing here reflected the movie.
It did.
Marketing here was like, you're going to get the dark and gritty Eddie Brock. Knock, knock, get ready for grit and darkness. And then it was like, buddy comedy. Like, that at all accurate. China got it much more.
Well, and part of the appeal, I think, with Aquaman is they're getting it 2 weeks before the U.S., so it's the first major market for the film to open, and I think that brings a lot of buzz to it, and Warner Brothers was very aggressive. They sent Jason Momoa out there. They're doing massive events in China to get the word out on this movie. They really did a hard push. And it's largely because of the Chinese release schedule, but I think also because it's a global market in many ways. I've talked on the show about, sometimes people think that the overseas gross will always save a movie, and that's not necessarily true. But at the same time, it's smart for studios to think more globally, because while they take home a bigger chunk of the money that's made in the United States, there's more money to be had overseas and in foreign markets. So I think it's a smart move to market aggressively for the strategy they think that works. And so far, it looks like Warner Brothers' strategy for Aquaman has worked. We'll know a lot more about it tomorrow when the review embargo drops and see how the views are for the movie. Warner
Brothers, I know this is such a granular, weird thing to say, but the Warner Brothers marketing team has been killing it this year, in my opinion.
They've been crushing
They've really been killing it. They actually had a change in leadership, I think about a year ago, and it's been exceptionally well done marketing. Although, again, with the Meg, it was very misleading marketing, but it was great marketing, and it really, really worked for the movie.
Yeah.
Crazy Rich Asians.
They put lipstick on that Fantastic Beast turd. The trailers looked awesome. I was so excited.
Yeah, they marketed it just the way it needed to be, for sure. Yeah, they've done a really good job.
A lot of Dumbledore in there.
Yeah.
A lot of Dumbledore in the trailer.
Yeah.
In the trailer.
Yep.
In the trailer, there is a lot of Dumbledore.
And Fantastic Beasts. I could not find them.
In the movie, they were not. There were some beasts. There was like the cat, angry cat. So let's talk about Aquaman has a villain. It has obviously the Ocean Master. It's got a couple of villains.
Segue.
And well, you asked if I've seen the movie. I have, and the reason is because I did an interview with Patrick. Oh my God.
Wilson.
Thank you.
Warburton or Wilson?
Thank you.
Hey, I'm an Aquaman.
I'm an Aquaman who plays
I got
Orm,
gills.
the ocean master.
Go punch a fish.
Oh my God, that's the interview.
Tried it.
Hey, you just throw it at
He
people.
was really interesting though. You want to know why?
Patrick Warburton or Patrick Wilson?
Well, Patrick Warburton's always really interesting.
Yes, he is.
I think that goes without saying.
What about Duffy?
But Patrick Wilson.
What?
God damn it! I give up.
Oh, Patrick Duffy. Okay. The cats are loose.
Jason Patrick.
Yes.
St. Patrick's Day. Patrick Wilson was actually really, really interesting because I think he did not grow up, I think, reading comic books is what he said, but he learned after doing Watchmen that in order to do interviews on these things, like, he should be very prepared, and he was incredibly prepared to talk about the character from that perspective, the Starr perspective, and he was the one that suggested that his character look more like the OG Aquaman than because Jason Momoa. He was like, well, you can't have Orm look like the Orm in the comics. You want to have him look different than the Aquaman, and the Aquaman looks like Orm, so I'll look like the Aquaman. He's kind of trying to flip that a little bit. My point with that is villains. And I'm curious how people respond to him as a villain, because in my opinion, he's kind of like a mix between, this is not a spoiler, Thanos and Loki. And you'll see when you see the movie what that means and how people respond to him. But there were a lot of really good villains this year.
Was it Chin Grooves?
It was about it was mostly, it was a combination of chin grooves and hair
Sure.
Yeah.
that I think
get
was
that.
working to create
What's he
that.
working with glove-wise? Anything that could be described as a gauntlet?
You know,
I would prefer no glove spoilers, please.
Okay.
For Aquaman.
Yeah.
I'm only hours. That's why there's no charting today. I'm going to go see Aquaman so we can review it tomorrow. So, I would prefer to walk in glove spoiler.
You want to be
Fair enough.
spoiler?
I get that.
We'll talk
Okay.
about it later. Off camera.
All right, we'll smell that glove later. So there are great villains
like
this year. We were going to talk.
Yes.
Ooh.
It's an underwater glove.
It is an underwater glove. So, top 100 villains. Fandom put together a list of the top 100 most searched villains. Number one was, to no one's surprise, not Grindelwald. It wasn't Grindelwald. Why
No,
do we-
that would not be that. It is not surprising that not Grindelwald is number one.
It was Thanos. Why do we have this picture? It was
Although
Thanos.
it could be the most searched for because people are like, wait, who was he?
It wasn't, though. It was
Okay,
Thanos.
fair enough.
it was
Yeah.
Thanos.
Thanos the Manos.
Thanos the Manos, number one in our hearts and on the search engines. But we also talked about some of our favorite villains of the year. We have that coming out this Friday as a Screen Junkies show. Let's talk
Where's
about
the list? Is the list? When's the list coming out?
The list is out today. The Fandom 100.
Okay.
That's out today. We'll have a link in
Well, there it is.
in the description below.
Gilgrave, hanging on.
Jessica.
Jessica.
I mean, it was great, but that's like
Jessica.
three years ago now. Two. Two.
Was Jessica
made
Jones
an
2
impact.
this year? Was that this year?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's been a long year.
His shadow falls over the
Yes.
entire series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, you can't sleep on, that performance was pretty
It's
great.
fantastic.
So we talked about our favorites of the year, which I will not reveal today so that you can tune in on Friday when that video is available to you. But who are some of the ones that you liked, Joe Starr, that didn't make it to our favorites?
To our favorites or the Fandom 100?
To our favorites.
Oh, oh boy. I liked Screenslaver a lot, just for the fact that I thought it was funny that Disney hid in plain sight and had a person who's like, maybe we should watch less movies and TV, was their bad guy. I thought that was pretty funny. The Disney was like, no, you need us. And I also just like the design of the character, and even though it wasn't actually Screenslaver that she fought in that weird little apartment, that's a great sequence. So she was one of my big ones. That was not on the list.
Yeah, how about
I
you?
had some that, because we compiled our thoughts for the list, and I had some that were more like concepts that didn't make it, like puberty in 8th grade. It's the real villain of that story in many ways, or the creative team behind Gotti. Things that people would be like, "Can you please take this list of fictional villains seriously?" That I did not include. Those are definitely two of them. I'm trying to think of some others that were in my top 10 that didn't make it.
Right now, I'm just number one with a bullet is whoever gave Sonic those thick
Shapely
hamstrings.
thighs.
Those shapely thighs.
Made Sonic thick, but anyways.
Why are we mad at Sonic?
I don't understand
Why is Sonic in the real world?
Okay.
You know?
Because a movie poster came out,
Yeah.
and we need to be mad about it.
Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard for me to say what's not, because I wasn't around for what ended up being on the top 5. So maybe here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's on there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I talked about that.
All right. I'll second one from 8th grade is that kid in the car that
Yeah.
that was one of the creepiest just moments in cinema, bar none, and
do
it
not
happened in the
like.
year of our Lord 2018.
Yeah.
So Car Kid from 8th grade gets my vote.
If you guys haven't seen 8th grade, the scene that Spencer is describing makes me do this. It's very, very
bad.
upsetting. It's
very
very,
tense.
very disturbing, very tense. But the movie itself is not full of that.
No.
So it's actually one of the more interesting moments in a movie this year because it completely takes you out of the movie to that point,
Yeah.
and then you go back into it.
Yeah.
And I think it highlights the level of vulnerability that there is to being an 8th grade girl who is I don't know, if anything like me, like really dumb, makes very bad choices, like getting into that car. But another concept villain that I think was in 2 movies, including 8th grade and Wreck-It Ralph, was Insecurity as a concept villain.
That's good.
Who was a I think that's just for life, though. I think
Sure.
that might be just for our whole world. Insecurity is the concept villain of 2018.
Yeah, definitely. There
So
were a
I'm-
lot of great villains in something I watched last week was the Ballad of Buster Scruggs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much like
Yeah.
anyone in the Old West, it
Was a
seems
villain?
like mostly Liam Neeson. Ooh,
Yeah.
what a dick.
Oh,
Big
Yeah,
awful.
What an a-hole. But a lot of people in that, which I definitely recommend people check out.
Yeah, it was really good, but there was also not waiting to be sure was a villain in one of those stories. Just,
Yeah.
impatience was a villain in
Yeah.
one of those
But a lot of
stories.
low-down dirty varmints.
misperception.
All the dirty
Yeah.
varmints from
Dirty
Buster
varmints.
Scruggs.
I found the Manning. I wrote down the Manning brothers from Widows. Brian Tyree Henry and Daniel Kaluuya.
Scary.
Both scary. Victor Drago.
Sure.
Good.
Yeah, I had so much empathy for him.
Yeah, but he's very imposing. Abigail
Yeah.
from The Favorite, Emma Stone from The Favorite.
Haven't
She
seen
was
it.
a great villain. And then there's a spoiler character because it spoils the movie. But spoiler character from A Simple Favor. If you've seen A Simple Favor, then you know who I'm talking about. Great performance.
Yeah.
Great character.
There's a lot of very good villains and characters this year. I'm curious to see what you guys will make of this list. Check it out. The Fandom 100 you can check out right now. The link is in the comments below, and then we'll be talking about some of our favorites from the year and the Screen Junkies show, which will be coming out this Friday, and we'll just continue to think of good villains.
Motherhood in a Tully and Hereditary.
I think in her, you know what's fascinating? You're right, especially in Hereditary. Motherhood itself was kind of a villain, but genetics was a villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I didn't think about it because I was thinking about the aliens from A Quiet Place, but really Noise. Noise
Noise
was a
was
great
the
villain
villain.
in A Quiet Place.
Yeah.
And aren't they doing the blind
Fire.
version of it?
Yeah.
On Netflix,
But everyone's
Bird
saying,
Box?
like, it's good on its
Sandra
own,
Bullock.
but-
I'm sure it is, but it's just unfortunate timing that
Yeah.
there happen to be 2 movies about creatures, right?
Yeah.
Coming after you, and just one of them is you can't hear them, and one of them is you can't see them.
Hollywood Synergy was a villain for both Bird Box and Mowgli.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, poor
Yeah.
Mowgli.
Like, oops.
Oopsie.
Having the same idea. Yeah, let us know some of your villains in the comments below. Do check out the Fandom 100. Do check out the Screen Junkies show this Friday. It'll be on the main channel. We'll list our actual favorite villains of the year. But there were a lot of really good ones that, did not make it to the list. And Spencer didn't make it because I don't remember what was happening with you that
I don't
day.
remember. Oh, plumbing.
It
Yeah.
was the plumbing issue.
Oh,
I
that's
moved
right.
and I've been doing a lot of home ec. It sucks.
Later. later when we talk about the gloves. Another fun thing that we had out this week was head of ILM came right here to us
Yes.
at Screen Junkies
Yeah.
to break down the Kessel Run. That was really cool. That's on the main channel right now.
Rob Brado,
Yeah.
he's the head of ILM.
Which is crazy. He was right here.
He's right here as the visual
reached
effects
out to us.
supervisor. He
And
reached out to us.
Yeah, which is even more crazy.
No big deal.
And if I may plead with you to please go watch it.
Yeah.
It came out this weekend, and I'm very encouraged by the people that did watch it, but not a lot of people watched it, and it is the kind of stuff that we love to do because, I mean, we love honest trailers, we love movie fights and everything, but we also love making stuff like this, and we had a great opportunity to talk to someone who directly made it, and I think no matter if it's because it's about Solo, I think no matter what you thought of the movie, you're gonna like it. I think it's really interesting, and honestly, we just kind of want license to be able to make stuff like this more.
Yeah.
And we can't, it's harder to get that if we put it out and nobody watches it.
It might grow over time. This might be a slower.
Yeah.
I'll double down on that and say a lot of hard work went into it. It's a really cool video. We're really proud of it.
Very, yes.
We like it a lot. We think it's interesting. It's the kind of way that we would like to talk about film with you guys, in addition to the insightful shenanigans that we offer on a regular basis, and the insightful, well put together shenanigans that is the Honest Trailer. Elevated. We want to do all of that, so we would love for you guys to check it out. And Spencer and Dan did a really fun interview, and I can say that I watched it. I thought it was a great interview.
Thank you.
With Rob, which you can watch right now. You should know that we will have a Bumblebee review later today. We will have an Aquaman review tomorrow morning that will be replacing SJU because the embargo is up at 11 a.m., so coincidence. That will be going instead of SJU tomorrow. Lots of really good things coming. So many reviews coming this week. Oh my God, Dan.
Oh my God,
We got Mary Poppins.
All the studios are just like, they're getting all the Christmas movies out. So we have, if you want to know anything about any of the movies, big movies coming out, watch us this week, because I think just about everything is out this week, except for Welcome to Morrowind, which I think we're doing next week.
So, that's the one. So stay tuned. Stay tuned right now for the interview with Rob, Dan, and Spencer. It's a good one, and we will see you tomorrow.
Hey everybody, Dan Murrell here with Spencer Gilbert, and we have a very special guest, Rob Brado. He is the head of Industrial Light and Magic, the legendary special effects company, and was the visual effects supervisor on Solo, a Star Wars story, but has also done visual effects work on so many other great movies that we're going to try to talk about today. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun.
I hate to start things off too negatively, but we write honest trailers, and we often find ourselves in the position of pointing out how bad the CGI is in a movie.
I hadn't noticed.
How does that happen? Not at ILM, of course, but how does CGI end up on screen with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it, and we're going like, that looks terrible?
Usually the biggest challenges are late changes, so you just don't have enough time sometimes to finish everything at the high degree of quality, or sometimes you're out on set and you want to control the elements, but you're running out of light, or you don't have the right pieces and the hair comp doesn't look good because you just didn't get enough light on the blue screen, or many other combination of factors where maybe they shot it in magic hour and they actually now want it to be the middle of the day, and you do your best to digitally relight it, but it's hard to get it to that right level of finish. So there always ends up being all these circumstances kind of beyond the control of the individual effects artist, or actually beyond anybody's individual control.
So if like a character grows a mustache for another role, and then for
hypothetically, yes.
If they were to hypothetically have a mustache, and then even if they did pickups, there's really nothing you can do about that.
Yes, very few ways around some of those challenges, unless you go with a CG face replacement on a big actor, but that's not something you can do in a couple of weeks.
Movies that were made 35 years ago or 25 years ago have CG and VFX that look, to our eyes, better than some movies that came out last year. And is it just because those movies had 30 shots and the other one had 300?
Or were we 12 at the time and it's our nostalgia that makes it seem perfect?
You're nostalgic for the original look. Actually, I think the amount of care that went in and love that went into those 65 shots in the original Jurassic Park, and it was a relatively low number of shots, so 100 artists or 60 artists working really hard for a year to bring that to you. And a common visual effects movie today will have 1,500 shots in it, and spread with really talented artists all over the world, but it requires somebody with a really specific drive and focus to be able to draw all those shots together and make them look, all top notch.
I mean, obviously the big effects heavy sequences start earlier, so by the time you were next to Ron Howard, did you have to be like, sorry, we've already rendered that? Like, how much did it was already done by the time he came along, effects wise?
No, we have a lot of the designs in place, but almost all the shot work happens much later. So things like ship designs and environmental work and that kind of thing we do as early as possible. And then we had the very unusual circumstance on the Kessel Run and the sequences inside the Falcon cockpit on this show that we had done the full quality visual effects out the window. So what you see is what you get. So that part was more planned out.
Okay.
But then, Ron Howard says, I really think I want to add a space monster. And while we were shooting, John Kasdan is writing, and we're designing a space monster, and we're prevising it. And, a couple weeks later, we have a medium quality space monster up on the screen for everyone to react to. So there is some flexibility.
Ron Howard does that for every movie.
Yeah, that's true. I heard the same story about Splash.
Yeah, the space monster in Backdraft,
I don't know if that was necessary.
touch and go.
That was a little weird. You worked on Independence Day, which I think was sort of one of the, after sort of the groundbreaking like T2 Jurassic Park, like Independence Day, I think was one of those too, as far as like big scale computer visual effects. What did you do? Did you make this? Did you create this? Are you responsible for this?
So what I did with the alien attackers and the F-18s, I specifically worked on the dogfight scenes in Independence Day. The other big thing I got to do in that film was blow up the alien mothership. So I blew the alien mothership up in that, and then in Roland Emmerich's next big film, I fired the missiles that killed Godzilla. So I got to be a part of both of those moments.
I mean, it's interesting that you're saying this because Randy Quaid's on the record saying those were all real UFOs.
There you go.
So I don't. You be the judge.
Hard to argue.
This is a discussion that rears its head for us every single Oscar season.
Yes.
Should performance capture artists be nominated for Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor? How should they be recognized by the Academy, if they should be recognized by the Academy? Should Andy Serkis get Oscars? If so, how many?
There's some Oscar-worthy performances that Andy Serkis has given us. And they've been brought to the screen by really talented people who have honestly added to them. So in the best possible world, it would be a shared thing where the person who's transferring that performance onto the new creature and Andy Serkis are somehow sharing that. But hey, if Andy Serkis gets an Oscar for a visual effects created character, I think we're all celebrating.
Well, I have one more question. You just opened up a TV and streaming division at ILM to work on The Mandalorian and the Cassian something.
The Cassian Andor stories, tales, chronicles.
Yes. I mean, I know you probably can't say anything bad, but like, is it cool?
It's so cool, I have to say. We're having so much fun working on this.
All right, well, breaking news here on ScreenJunkies News. The Mandalorian.
It's cool.
It's cool. Rob Brado, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, dude.